Hello, my name is Marcus Ruiz Evans. I am leader of the Cal Exit movement, currently the chief executive officer. We're going to cover couple key points on the topic that's been trending recently. We have a lot of coverage here at Yes California, almost exclusively, given that there's no one else in the media really covering this or interviewing the key players or covering it in depth and making sure that you're informed about what's actually going on. So we are talking about divorce between states. That is very popular right now. We've done a video documenting that this is being talked about. We've also done a historical timeline on that. What we're going to do in this video is talk about the counterpoints and how they're lies. So as the topic of divorce between states started to become very popular and started to recently trend, many people came out and started to say that it was a horrible idea. We're going to look at the arguments from the New York Magazine in an article called No Red State Rebels, There Will Be No Secession. Also from New York Post, sorry, but a national split up just won't work. Politico magazine, Americans' national divorce, they're wrong. Also, national divorce is a poisonally stupid idea, released recently. Also, Sank Ugar, the Young Turks. And finally, The Week magazine, the impractical but plausible fantasy of a national divorce. So, The Week, New York Magazine, New York Post, Politico, uh, some conservative magazines, and the Young Turks. There's 6 different sources of people who have talked about why this is a horrible idea and should never happen. We're going to go over point by point what they said, because some of them are using some of the similar argumentative talking points against the idea, and we're going to show how they're all misinforming you. So, just real quick, some of the arguments are: number one, you are abandoning liberals if you do this. Number two, it would result in a civil war. Number three, you can't do this because there are left and right people in each state, not just between states. Number four, world democracy would fall. Number five, this will result in Russia and China invading. Number six, states will stop trading with each other. And number seven, you cannot split up. We can never come to an agreement on divorce if we are actually that much in opposition to each other. So, all of those are the major points that multiple magazines are making as to why national divorce is a ridiculous concept. We're going to go by each one, show you the quotes, what they're talking about, and then we're going to cover how they're wrong. One of the benefits here at Yes California is that we've been at this for a while. We were globally covered. I myself was covered by the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Weekly, San Francisco Chronicle, Sacramento Bee a couple times. And you begin to see the arguments that people have against secession against California. Now, those came in 2017, but it's the exact same arguments writ large for all of America that we saw 4 years ago. So we've had time to develop the counter arguments, look into the research, and make sure that we were properly understanding the argumentative reasons for why this is a reasonable idea. And we're going to apply those now to national divorce using our almost 5 to 7 years of expertise, talking with thousands of Californians and at least 100 different reporters across all 50 states and about 30 different nations. So let's get right into that. Here's the first counter argument against national divorce. So you are abandoning liberals. Here's some quotes for you. Quote, over half of Trump voters and 41% of Biden voters think it might be time to secede from the union. Here's one reason why that's a disastrous idea. Imagine how brutal Trump land would be to minorities. They would have no check on their white supremacy and dictatorial tendencies. Another quote, but how could I happily accept the accelerated subjugation of women and people of color in a new adjacent red America any more than abolitionists could accept the continuation and expansion of slavery they hated? Those are two different articles, and they're basically getting at an argument that we saw before, which is if the left leaves America, then America becomes super hardcore, and any minorities stuck in there will lose all their rights. So the only reason minorities in red states are able to live with the amount of freedom and dignity and perseverance in their selves that they're able to is not because of those southern states or Midwestern states or Trump voting states. It's because liberals in liberal states are pushing federal legislation to protect them. And if the liberal states were gone, then all of the minorities would be pushed into a future that was disgusting and horrible for them, because now there was nobody to fight for them, even outside of their state. Well, the first thing that we want to point out is, why do you think that's the case? Fact is that Georgia is growing in population. Georgia's full of African American people, and many African Americans have moved to Georgia over the last few years. At the same time, Georgia's passed regressive laws on voting rights against African Americans and on abortion rights. That did not stop African Americans from moving there. Texas is another example. It's another place in the South. It's crawling with Latinos, and even more Latinos move there again after they restricted voting rights for minorities and other restrictive rights. So you have two southern red states passing regressive backwards laws against minorities, and minorities are still going there. If minorities were so worried about how horrible the conditions were in these laws that white liberals who don't live in those states are talking about, then why are minorities moving? Why aren't they fleeing those places? That's just not happening. So, if this is true and minorities are terrified of red states, why are they staying there? Why aren't they abandoning them? How come the population of those places is going up with minorities? Maybe it's because they don't need your protection or want it. Secondly, they know they can move anytime they want. I mean, the South has African American people in very large amounts throughout multiple states. They didn't leave. Nobody's forcing them to be there. They stay there. And yet we know that there's regressive laws and abuse against African Americans in those areas. Why didn't they leave if it was so horrible? Secondly, this premise acts like America is already fighting well for minorities. Let's go, a couple things. One's brown kids in cyclone fencing. Obama and Biden started that policy, placing brown-skinned children, like animals, separated from their parents without access to showers or reporters or interviews or services, sleeping in concentration camp conditions. That continued under Trump. It has continued under Biden. So, as a Latino, you are not doing well for us. Secondly, the Supreme Court said racial profiling of Latinos is okay. That was under Obama, continued under Trump. It's still under Biden. And yes, states are acting on that. They've also done sweeps of Latinos based upon the fact that America says racial profiling or picking out people because they look Latin is acceptable. How is that protecting us? Let's go to African Americans. The fact is that Barack Obama really didn't do much for police reform. The BLM movement, and I encourage everybody to check this out, came after he was president because he did nothing on it. If Obama was so great and protected minorities, how come there was a BLM movement that existed, period? Why didn't Obama get it done? Why did they have to do something after him? He was in office for 2 terms, 8 years. And then African American people said, well, actually, the most important thing is not being murdered, and focused on that after he was out. So that's minorities not in power getting the results that they wanted, because when there was minorities in power, they didn't get the results they were looking for. Again, how does that represent a racial utopia? Secondly, America voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and almost again in 2020. The man said a lot of racist things, and half of the country voted for him in 2016. Minorities across America did not stop Trump from winning the election in 2016. America was very diverse. So if minorities and the left were able to stop these horrible things, how come it didn't work in 2016? And how come it almost didn't work in 2020? It's almost. And how come Donald Trump got huge amounts of the Latino vote and a sizable portion of the African American vote? These are all things you're going to have to add up and explain when you're talking about how there's a utopia and good times for minorities, and that if the left, it would all be bad. All of these data points that I mentioned are bumps in the road for that argument that have not been explained. They kind of point to it's not a racial utopia, and minorities in red states do not need white people in left states to save them. That's a little bit insulting, too. Point number 2, it would result in a civil war. States would have to shoot at each other if there was secession. Quote, could I ever trust that a neighbor whose leadership and citizens believed their policies reflected the unchanging ancient will of the Almighty would leave our fences alone? Yes, you can. For this reason, secession would result through mutual agreement. So the red states would be wanting to leave. The left would want to leave. They would both say, I don't want to be involved with you, and I'm leaving. If you voted for, and a majority of your people said, I want to separate, why then would you go back on that? And when did Americans do that? When in American history did a majority of the American people vote for something, and then those same people fought against it? So we're only talking about secession through the system, through a national divorce, through everyone agreeing. That means the majority of the people in the red states would agree to this. Why would a majority of the people of the red states use the system, go through the proper channels, have this separation, and then say, what I actually meant was that I hate that idea and I want to redo it? You wouldn't. Especially if you voted for it, had to work for it, and achieved the vote, you'd you'd assume that that's something that you wanted as success. You do not rip apart something you've pushed through legislation on. It doesn't happen. So that's a ridiculous argument because we're talking about peaceful separation. No one's talking about shoot your way out, not even the ones on the right. So now counterpoint number 3, you can't do this because there are left and right people in each state. And if you were going to separate, how do you get those conservatives out of the blue and how do you get the left people out of Trump lands in the union? Quotes, how would it play out with conservatives and progressives amply represented in every state in the union? Second quote, do conservatives simply surrender the whole Empire State and those 3.2 million voters in the divorce? How would those 3.2 million feel? It's not just New York. California has survived this recall election, but 3.3 million Californians voted to remove him, more than the entire population of the second most Republican state of Utah. A couple things. They're using big numbers, but is that accurate? So New York has a gigantic population of millions and millions of people. What percentage is 3.2? Because I know that the conservatives in New York State live outside of the city, in the state, where it's very low population, and the majority of the population is in the city. So when you say 3.2, what does that compare to? 20 million? That's nothing. 30 million? That's nothing. Now, if it's 3.2 out of a total population of 8 million, then sure, we're looking at about a third of the population. So what I find interesting is they're not using percentages or relationship of numbers at all. Take, for example, California. Yes, 3.3 million people voted against Gavin and a couple million people voted for Trump out of a pop of 40. What's 3 out of 40? Right? So you have 40 and you're taking 3. We're looking at less than 5%. Frankly put, populations can afford to have 10% leave and be just fine. It happens all the time, and it wouldn't be a bad thing or a mass exodus. So millions of people sounds bad. Sure. What percentage? I would argue that most of these states, we're talking about a small minority who doesn't share the opinion of the majority of the state, and they would have to leave. So let's talk here in California. A couple million Trump voters out of 40 million. That's not enough to make anything happen. It's also not enough to cause calamity. If all those people got up tomorrow and left, it would do absolutely nothing largely to our economy or our way of life. We would easily survive. If you're talking 30% of the population, a fifth of the population, sure. You're talking 5-ish%? No. So not an issue. Millions don't count. What percentage of the population? Is it a low percent? It'll be just fine. Here's why. There's something called people are already leaving. So people on the left are leaving conservative areas. California gets arrivals every day. You're hearing a lot about people who are left leaving California and going to conservative states. That's true. But there's also, in those same polling and census numbers, people who are liberal in conservative states moving to California. It's called the Great Sort. It's been going on for many years. You can type that in. Millions of people have already left a state they don't like to go to a state that they feel fits them politically. It's been going on, and California has the highest amount of people leaving for political reasons ever before seen in our entire 500-year history. So people sort themselves out. They are doing it more than they've ever done in history. It's been largely peaceful, and it's been going on already. So yes, conservatives could leave liberal areas, and yes, liberals could leave conservative areas. They're probably going to be small percentages, and it's already happening. Secondly, a lot of people aren't going to leave. These places are already their political philosophy is well established. So if you're living in Tennessee and it's super conservative and you're liberal and you're there, you're staying because of family. You're not staying for politics, and you will continue to put up with bad politics for your family. How do I know? Because it's the same thing with the Trump voters. They've interviewed the Trump voters out here in the West. And many of them say, I would go if I could, but I have a daughter and I can't go. So the conservatives that would leave have already left. If California was independent or other left states left, they would stay. it wouldn't be so horrible that they would leave, because things are already against the way that they think the environment should be. And if it's already bad now. So frankly, if you can't handle it, you've already left that state. And for those that would need to leave, they already can. There you have moving companies doing this. So sorting already happens. It's not going to be that many people, relationship wise, to the populations there. And not that many people are going to leave anyways, because they've already left. Secondly, counties don't exist. States exist. So the entire legal structure of America goes from the Paris Accords, which was a treaty, and then the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Those three documents recognize states. Counties exist because of them. So you cannot provide freedom for a legal body that doesn't exist under federal law at all. The federal government would have to recognize counties, which they don't. So counties can't leave states. States would have to allow people to leave. Now, if California wants to let certain counties go, it could do that, but it could also choose not to. And there's no real legal framework for them to be able to, a county to fight against the state. People point out West Virginia. That was because the president created a separate state and then recognized it, which consisted of counties. Lincoln did not recognize 17 independent counties, and then later they were cobbled into a state. Lincoln recognized a separate state, which was of counties. That's key. There was no recognition of the counties as separate. They came into the Union as a legal, cohesive body. Point number 5. If there's divorce amongst the states, world democracy falls. Quote, the United States foundering on its democratic divisions would be a significant blow to the prestige of liberal democracy around the planet. Lincoln worried about this effect for the first time around, and it might even be worse now. A fledgling democracy unable to hold it together, what would be seen as a stable republic with the most durable political institutions on the planet, would cause dismay. That's a total lie. So what they're saying is that if America broke up into different pieces, the world would look at that and say, well, that's bad for democracy, so maybe democracy can't work, and you'd have this world march towards democracy retard. Total garbage. Here's why. Most of the world democracies do not look to America for anything. Now, maybe during Obama they did, but that was destroyed during Donald Trump. Most of the world saw America pick Donald Trump, and they were amazed and shocked. So they don't even know how America do that. Then most of the world saw America pick Biden, and Biden did the same thing. Kids in cages. He kept the refugee camp as Donald Trump. He alienated allies. He made major foreign policy disasters, just like Donald Trump. You had European nations talking about forming new alliances separate from NATO during the time of Trump. Those conversations between those former NATO countries are still happening. And when Biden was elected, there were European leaders quietly saying, we're not sure that you're stable. The fact is that America voted in Trump. That was seen as madness. Never got better. And it certainly hasn't gotten better with Biden. So that's 2 presidencies in a row where the rest of the world looks at America as a basket case and unable to function. They're not looking this as the beacon of democracy. It doesn't happen. In fact, the beacon of democracy is typically Scandinavia. Secondly, America is already losing the case of being the leader on democracy. During Obama, the Philippines and Turkey and Hungary and Thailand moved out of the U.S. sphere and towards China and Russia and away from democracy. So that was during Obama. Countries who were pursuing democracy were pulling away from America and going away from democracy. Then Trump wanted out of NATO. And then Biden destroyed a historic alliance with a major NATO partner over nuclear missiles and subways. In submarines. And then there was the Afghanistan failure. And when you add the fact that America was losing allies in democracy during Obama, Trump encouraged dictatorships, the rest of the world thought America was crazy, lost respect for it in Trump, and now they're back to that under Biden. What are you talking about? Where is the evidence that the world is looking to America as the beacon of democracy and the reason that they're pursuing it? What is that based upon? Because that's not accurate at all. Number 5, this will result in a foreign invasion. Quotes, the deleterious effects of a breakup, a disaggregated United States would be instantly less powerful. Russia and China would be delighted and presumably believe that we deserve the experience the equivalent of the crack up of the Soviet Union. Contemporaries wish secession movements leading to civil war on their enemies. That might be true. China and Russia may look forward to a broken up America, but they could also maybe not look forward to it. So the fact is that California criticized the Chinese government for its human rights abuses and for the way that it was operating against California labor standards. California's protests against the Chinese government were pushed down because of the American government. If California's independent, China's going to have more complaints against them than they do now. Secondly, why do you think China's not already in control of America? What's that based upon? The fact that Joe Biden can excuse genocide on TV, the fact that China owns most of the money, the fact that major Hollywood stars, if they say anything negative about that government, have to go and immediately apologize. So you're not talking about our famous people standing up to China. You're not talking about our president. You're not talking about our administration. Trump was aggressive with China, and he was criticized for doing that. And then we were told that Russia controlled Trump and gave him everything that they wanted. Maybe, maybe not. But Russia got Biden to undo the embargo against the gas pipeline from their country into Europe, which is exactly what they wanted. So Russia got the gas pipeline that they wanted. Russia has not been invaded and not been destabilized by even America's best efforts. China seems to highly influence the American government already, and it already got all the trade terms that it wanted before. So if Russia is able to push America around, remember, they stalled Obama straight up in Syria. Like, they pushed back against Obama and won. And they kept their bases in the Ukraine, and it's a decade later. And China had massive influence for decades amongst multiple administrations and seems to own Biden. So why are these countries threatened, and why would they not think that a united America is more beneficial for them than a separated America? You're going to have to prove that a united America is some force against Russia and China. And the fact is that you can't say that now with China. You can't say it now with China with previous administrations, and you can't say it with Russia now because they just gave them the gas pipeline. I mean, they're sending money to the Ukraine, but they never brought Ukraine into the media. They never took back into NATO. They never took back Syria. These countries may be getting exactly what they want. But there's also another part. People say states break off and then China or Russia will immediately come in and recognize them. Why? The United States doesn't allow foreign countries into Mexico or Canada. The only foreign presence in the entire Western Hemisphere is Panama for China and Cuba for Russia, way far from the borders of America, and not in Mexico or a northern neighbor. It's called a nuclear wall, basically a defense and deterrence shield. So America's not going to allow major foreign actors with militaries anywhere near its proximity. So even if a state broke up, why would America, in trying to defend itself, allow that to happen? The fact is that if America broke up, it still doesn't want to be Russia or China. And it still wouldn't allow those countries into its area, just like Russia and China don't like it when American bases are near them. I mean, the Chinese hate Taiwan, and the Russians hated the American presence in Afghanistan because it was right on their borders. So America does this to other countries. It would never allow it here. Whether we're separate states, America still has this giant military and all these nuclear weapons. They're not going to allow these countries in. Secondly, are we sure that these countries view it as definitely better that America's broken up versus a whole body that's somewhat predictable and they're able to control? I mean, the Chinese literally said the thing that they hated worst about Trump was the unpredictability. China doesn't like chaos. A broken up America would be chaos. That means they can't assume that they know what's going to happen. They hate that more than anything. They've literally said that to us. Number 6, states stop trading with each other, and this turns into a third world desert, basically, of economics. So the economic consequences could be severe. The United States of America is a sprawling continent-wide trade zone, creating a vast domestic market that makes us all better off. Exchanging that for what might be a market balkanized by a state or region would be a major loss. If there were to be a sovereign, pure red and blue states, this would look like the relatively neat split of the United States in two in the 1860s. Actually, it would not look like that. It would look like the Treaty of Peace in Europe in the 1600s, which resulted in about 50 European countries. Here's why that's wrong. So they're talking about how Europe had wars in the 1600s, and then they had the Westphalia Conference, and then they broke up into like 30 to 50 different recognized countries. And they were also talking about the balkanization, the Balkans. So the Balkans were a cohesive country, and then they split up and they started fighting with each other. So the concept is you have a government over a whole, and then it breaks up, and immediately they have to start fighting with each other because they're attacking. Why? Czechoslovakia broke up into the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. They trade with each other and defend each other, but they're separate countries. Canada and America fought a war against each other, killed each other, and then are separate countries and peaceably do so. England and America, the same thing. But then let's also look at this. The Treaty of Westphalia was in Europe in the 1600s. There were not roads, transportation lines, or railroads, okay? Then let's look at the balkanization. It was hard to get around. They didn't have roads. America has rail lines connecting all 50 states for 150 years, road lines connecting all 50 states, airlines, airports. I mean, there really isn't natural barriers within America. The Rocky Mountains is the only natural barrier. And it's not one body. It's like another group of states. So you have the Rocky Mountains as one. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to get around, but the roads are there and the railroads. And then you have the flat part of America, and it's just flat. You cannot have balkanization in areas that are largely well connected. So Europe in the 1600s was not well connected. Neither was the Balkans, and neither was Afghanistan when it recently fell apart into different regions. America's very well transportation connected and has a history of doing international trade with each other. Plus, most Americans believe in trade, especially out here. So if we have the infrastructure for trade, if we're not built for cutting each other off, if it's difficult to build these walls everywhere, why would we stop doing that? We're literally not built for that, and there's no interest in that. So that's a theory that comes from nothing. Point 7. We could never peacefully secede because we actually hate each other so much that we couldn't come to a deal. Wrong. Couples do this all the time. Quotes, but if we were to split up because we are irreparably divided and can't even agree on bathroom policies, how are we going to agree to divvy up our territory and resources? These kinds of things are what people fight wars for. That's true. But couples also divorce. Couples realize that they hate each other so much that it would be better to be friends and be divorced from each other. This happens all the time in every continent on Earth. Secondly, Scandinavia did this. So Sweden and another country were connected, and then they peaceably split apart. Singapore and Malaysia did this. Denmark and Iceland did this. Scotland and England did this. There are many places where people don't like each other, and they come to a peaceful agreement to separate. That's happened. It's happened right up to recent times, and it goes back to like 100 years ago. Secondly, couples do this all the time. And third, yes, California is liberal, mostly. We have some Trump supporters, and they are loved. But everyone supports California values. We've talked to 35 states. We've talked to secession movements in New Hampshire and Texas. And everyone says, we don't like you, but we would agree to be separate. So and if you look at Marjorie Taylor Greene's poll on secession, and it's showing a lot of people are for secession who even hate her, and those who are for her. So you have people who hate each other agreeing on secession. Secondly, Sarah Silverman slammed conservatives talking about secession in October and was widely celebrated for doing it. People who didn't like her, and they immediately came to her support. So we have these data points where people who are on opposite sides agree on secession. We know that men and women do it all the time. We know that countries have done it all the time. So why is this that we can't have a peaceful divorce where people agree to this? Why is it we can't agree on anything, so we'll never agree to be separate? What is that based upon? It's certainly not based upon demographics, the history of humanity, or the history of modern politics. And it's certainly not based upon recent conversations in the last month. So again, what is the basis for these points? Well, you've heard all of them. That's it for now. These come from The Week, New York Mag, New York Post, Politico, Reason Magazine, I believe, and Cenk Uygur, the Young Turks. You've heard all 7 points. We've pointed out how there's nothing to them and they're defeated. And again, you won't see that anywhere because the news just won't do their job.